presented by, let's do that. The meeting's being recorded. I'm Judge Lois Murphy from the Court of Common Pleas of Montgomery
Recording
County.
in progress.
And this is a program presented by the Elder Justice Roundtable for Montgomery County, focused on in-home services and placement services for older adults, seniors in Montgomery County. So welcome, and we're glad you could be with us. I see that we have about 36 people attending. We are expecting some more. So we may wait maybe just another 2 or 3 minutes before we get started. But shortly, I'll be making introductions of our panelists and introducing the program. All right, well, it's 9:05, and I think maybe we'll just begin and get started, and I'll begin with introductions of our panelists. So again, welcome. Welcome to this morning's presentation on in-home services and placement services for older adults in Montgomery County and elsewhere. As I said, I'm Judge Lois Murphy of the Court of Common Pleas, and I'm very pleased to have a wonderful, energetic, and distinguished panel of guests who are going to present to you on this topic. First, I'll introduce Elliott Smith. Elliott is currently the Deputy Administrator of Direct Care Services in the Montgomery County Office of Senior Services. He's been a staff member of the Montgomery County Office of Senior Services for the past decade and is a longtime advocate for older adults and is knowledgeable about aging services available across Montgomery County and the Commonwealth. Elliott received his Bachelor's of Social Work from Temple University and is currently pursuing a Master's of Public Administration at Westchester University. Welcome, Elliott. I'm going to come back to Sarah Moss because I know Sarah is having some connection problems. And next, I'll introduce to you Kate Vengraitis. Kate is a staff attorney in the SSI and Health and Independence units at Community Legal Services in Philadelphia. Kate's practice focuses on representing adults and children facing issues attaining and maintaining supplemental security income benefits, and she also assists older adults and individuals with disabilities in matters involving access to home and community-based services, as well as administrative and legislative advocacy, community education, and outreach. Thanks for joining us this morning, Kate, and welcome. Jessica Fenchel is the Vice President of Adult Behavioral Health and at Access Services. Jessica was key in the development and startup of several innovative programs in Montgomery County, including mobile crisis, justice-related services case management, and homeless street outreach. She has a Master's of Arts in Clinical Counseling Psychology from LaSalle University. Anthony Marone is a partner of Harvey, Ballard, and Bornstein, LLC, and has extensive experience representing elderly and disabled individuals in a variety of matters, including medical assistance benefits, wills and trusts, estate planning, decedents' estates, guardianship, and special needs trusts in Pennsylvania and New Jersey. Prior to 2014, Anthony was assistant counsel in the Office of General Counsel to the Governor of Pennsylvania. He was in the Department of Public Welfare's primary litigator and appellate attorney for medical assistance long-term care issues, and he received his JD from Temple University School of Law. Welcome, Anthony. I don't see Sarah Moss with us. I'll just take a moment to let you know that Sarah Moss will also be joining us. Sarah is the manager of the Muller Institute for Senior Health at Abington Hospital. This program encompasses both inpatient and outpatient programming for older adults. She holds a master's degree in social work from Smith College, and she has worked in geriatrics for over 20 years. And we're hoping that Sarah's connection problems will resolve shortly and she'll be able to join the conversation, and I'll note that and reintroduce her when she does. I also want to thank a few other people and introduce them. Diane Menio is joining us. Diane is the Executive Director of CARIE, the Center for Advocacy of the for the Rights and Interests of the Elderly. Hope I got that right, Diane. Always stumble over the for or the of. So welcome, Diane. Diane has been a long-time leader in elder justice issues and issues of the rights and interests of the elderly, including involvement in the Ombudsman program in the nursing home setting in Philadelphia and recently in Montgomery County. David Jaskowiak, one of the planners of this program, is also with us. David is an attorney specializing in elder law issues, practicing primarily in Montgomery County, as far as I know. David, very welcome, and thank you so much for all the work that you put into this program. Michael Johnson has been helping us with the technical issues, and we appreciate Michael's help. I think he's on loan to us from CARIE for today's program. And Ashley Cadet is the administrator of the Orphans Court Division in the courthouse in Montgomery County, and has also been instrumental in planning programs for the Elder Justice Roundtable, planning this program and getting this organized and inviting our speakers and attendees and organizing our agenda for today. So thank you, Ashley. Again, welcome everyone. We expect this conversation to be approximately an hour and a half. However, I believe some or all of the panelists, if their technology cooperates, are available to stay a little bit longer if there continue to be questions after 10:30. So those of you who continue to have questions can keep asking them. During the program, you will only see the panelists and myself, the facilitator, on the screen for the most part. You will not see all of the other over 30 attendees who are attending this morning. But there is a question and answer box at the bottom of your screen. You should see an opportunity to put in questions and answers, and I'll be moderating that question and answer throughout the session. So we will try to get to your questions that you type into the system. And as I said, if you want to hang on beyond 10:30, we'll try to get to any questions we've missed. With that, do any of our panelists want to say any additional words about their role in in-home services, or you're thinking about in-home services in today's environment, especially with the last year and a half we've had of pandemic planning, which has changed our lives? Anything any of you want to add, or any additional sort of introductory remarks any of you wish to make? I'm not going to call on you unless you, yeah.
If I can just add to what you've already said, Your Honor. First of all, thank you all for attending. We hope this is going to be, if not an ambitious, it's certainly a topical seminar. And it was in fact spawned by all of our concerns with the isolation factors that we saw going on with the nursing homes, and with people really needing to try to age at home with family members. And I think that the panel has a wide array of perspectives. So with that, I'll open it up to any of the panelists who want to jump in.
Sarah, welcome. We're glad you're able to join us. And we did introduce you. But if there's anything else you'd like to say about joining this program, you're certainly welcome to.
And now I'd like to thank you for your indulgence. I had 3 IT people helping me. And I have to tell you, I'm much better at geriatrics than I am in technology. So thank you.
Well, I'm going to jump right into it. We have quite a lot of topics to talk about. And I think just as an introductory matter for those in attendance, you know, it can get very complicated how to provide quality services, affordable services to people, to help people stay safely in their own homes, to provide adequate protection from scams and abuse and exploitation and other threats, while not providing overprotection for older adults. You know, that's really a balance that I think we all see and struggle with, and a challenge we all face. And that's really the genesis of why we thought this would be a useful program and a very valuable discussion with panelists to talk about the different approaches, the different potential solutions to challenging circumstances, to make sure sometimes there is a need for protection, but often there is a need to protect the autonomy, dignity, and independence of the individuals that we serve. And we really want to explore today with all of you and with your questions, what are some of the options that you might not be familiar with? That's really one of the things we're going to focus on today. And we thought it would be helpful. I'm going to throw this out to the panelists and start with a hypothetical that we came up with before today to jumpstart the conversation. So here's our hypothetical scenario, and I'm going to ask each of the panelists to give some comments, and we'll engage in a discussion, and then I'll ask some follow-up questions. An older woman who's a mother is 85 years old. She has a slip and fall at home, breaking her pelvis. She is hospitalized, and after the hospitalization and a rehab stay, the plan is for her to return to her home if possible. She has 2 adult sons. They both live with her, and she has an 85-year-old husband as well. One son is intellectually disabled, and the second son is schizophrenic. He's generally functional when he's taking his medications. Neither son works or has any assets. All have previously taken care of one another, the 4 individuals, in a largely symbiotic manner. So the first question, and there may be others that follow up, is, is it safe and appropriate for the mother to return to this home? And what else do you need to know to make that assessment? And we didn't really decide in advance who was going to start, but I see Elliott first on my screen, so maybe we'll start with Elliott, if that's okay.
Sure. Good morning, everyone. No problem. So this scenario is certainly, unfortunately, common in our work that we do with older adults. And how this would intersect with my office here in the Office of Senior Services would be some referrals, after the hospital stay and the rehab stay are completed. So we work closely with Sarah Moss. At Abington, we receive referrals for assessment and support that way. But to start the process of determining if it would be safe for her to go home, of course, would be an assessment of her capacity by a professional to ensure that she has decision-making abilities and that she can, drive her own care and make that decision to go back home. Just because there are challenges with her sons, doesn't mean that it's an unsafe environment for her to go back. We always have to be mindful and cognizant that our perspective on the situation doesn't necessarily translate to what is safe and what is not safe. We have to really fully assess things to make sure that we have a full picture of the situation. And I know that Sarah and her team at Abington do a wonderful job of that and work cooperatively with us when we need to support someone in a transition back into the community.
Sarah, would you want to chime in? Are there, from your point of view, and I'll ask the panelists if they wish, unless they're having a feedback problem, can unmute so that you can join in naturally if you wish. But Sarah, can you talk to us about how this kind of a case would present at the hospital or the rehab setting, and what questions and steps you'd be looking at?
Yeah, we actually also, Elliott, get these cases frequently. It's amazing how many people are out there who are living kind of on the edge. And when they come into the hospital, we see that edge. And, to the credit of our hospital staff, we get very concerned and rather paternalistic about taking care of people. And there are plenty of people here at the hospital who would want this woman to not go home, that this wouldn't be safe for her, that it would be irresponsible of us to discharge her to what we think is an unsafe environment. So, we do, as Judge Murphy said, we really do have to err on the side of giving her the life that she wants and life maybe that she had before with her sons and to age where she wants to age. So we would certainly get a competency eval from our psychiatrists. I think they are here at Abington, they're more likely to find somebody to lack capacity on a regular basis than perhaps I am. So we go back and forth about that a lot. And we really only request a guardianship when we have no other option. And we try to investigate all the other options we have. Are there, with this woman, are there brothers and sisters or nieces and nephews who could help us assess the situation as well? So we try to get a really full picture And then if we come to the conclusion that it really isn't safe or that we can't get enough in-home services in there to take care of her safely, then we might pursue a guardianship.
I have a question for Sarah and then Elliott, if you could follow up. To what extent do you need to do a home assessment? So actually physically have someone go out to the home to check and see what kind of a discharge it might be into the home. Do you ever do that, Sarah?
No, we don't have the capability of going in home. We can contact our visiting nurse association and ask them if they've seen this person before and what insight they have into the home, you know, and then we call Elliott's folks and say, you know, maybe you guys could help us out checking out the home situation.
Sure, yes, absolutely. I mean, if it came to a concern and, you know, there was enough going on that we knew about directly in the home, we would absolutely, you know, consider intervening and at least providing some resources through our office. Protective services is, of course, always available should the need be that great. But thankfully, you know, we don't see too many situations where we are just doing home assessments. It's more once the person's there, you know, we realize the situation is untenable, and then we step in to try and provide whatever support we can, whether that's, you know, home support or moving into, you know, a different setting, whatever the case may be.
Can we talk a little bit about what are the supports, benefits, services that you might be seeking to make sure are in place or to add in place to make the home situation, you know, workable and adequately supported?
So we would want to look at, can we get in the home care services out there? Another thing that's really important for us to evaluate, and you know, this kind of trying to figure it out without really knowing, is are they going to let these people in? We can set up all the services that we want, but if they get out into the community, and this happens frequently, and they say, oh, no, we don't need you. And they say, you know, we don't need you to come anymore. They might have one visit and then they're out of our jurisdiction. So we would, the home care agency, if they really have concerns at that point, would call Elliott's people and say, you know, they're kicking us out. We don't think this is safe. Can you come and see what you think? But we would want to get home care. If people have any private funds, we would want to get maybe aides in there. We would want to get other family who could be more supportive in there. Any eyes that we can have on the patient in the community are going to be really helpful to us.
It strikes me that finances is a question that often comes up with a lot of family members. How are we going to pay for this? Who do we go to help pay for it? Is it going to bankrupt us? And maybe this is a good time to ask Kate and Anthony if they can weigh in on what do you do with families who might be calling you and saying, what do we do now? How do we get help? Where do they even start?
All right, Kate, you could start.
Thanks. So I work at Community Legal Services, where we do primarily work with lower income individuals, but for our older adults, we do go up to a much higher income level due to funding. And so the really great thing about Pennsylvania's Medicaid system is that we have a program for waiver services, which is just a fancy term of saying that they waive the Medicaid limits. And so you can have a higher income level and still qualify for state funded long-term care services in your home. The application process can be really, really frustrating. I'm sure everyone who's involved with this, whether it's Elliott or Sarah, Jessica, Anthony, we all experience this frustration. And so it's really helpful for people to be able to navigate older adults and their families through it. There's really sort of, I think, the two options that we generally see, which is for people who can qualify for in-home services that are state funded through Medicaid, which is the waiver program, also known as community health choices. The income limit is about 3 times the SSI limit. So I think it's about $23.49 for 2021. I feel like I keep, thank you. Sorry, I keep going back to the one from last year because I was on leave at the beginning of this year. And you're only looking at the individual applicants' income. For resources, the limit is higher, it's $8,000. You are looking at both spouses' incomes, resources. There are a lot of exceptions. Things can get really in the weeds, which I'm sure Anthony can speak a lot more about. but it's very, very important for the older adults you're working with to disclose all of their income, all of their assets or resources, which is really anything that you could convert to cash. People often don't think of things like life insurance policies as assets, but when they have cash surrender value, that's what the state is counting on, because you could turn that around and use it for money. And so the complication here is that they require 60 months of bank statements to show that you haven't been transferring money to qualify for Medicaid. This can be really, really onerous. We work with a lot of families where they're trying to navigate this and how to both provide the documentation necessary, and often if it's not feasible, how to address that. And lastly, I would say that if they do not qualify financially for the waiver program, there are state local programs called the Options Program, which is through the AAAs, and they provide very similar level of services. There's sort of a cost sharing element, also gets really complicated, but the sort of the overall main highlights is that it's very important to start thinking about this, if possible, before someone is in an emergency situation. And the number one piece of advice I can give anyone with an aging parent, having seen my parents go through this, thinking about what I will have to go through, is to plan in advance and don't act rashly. We see people who quickly try to move money around or panic and sell things or give things away. That can have a lot of unintended consequences, which we might talk about down the road if there's questions. It's best to spend the money. If you don't qualify for legal services, talk to an elder law attorney, get your questions answered. It will protect you and your family in the long run. That's really my pitch, and I'm going to pass it over to Anthony.
Yeah, so it's correct. I see this type of situation all the time. And it's true that there are a lot of people who are living on the edge, and usually they call me when they go over the edge, which is basically what's happened in this case, is that I would suspect that mom or dad, probably mom, has kind of been the glue that holds the family together, and now she's no longer able to do that. I've had several cases just like this. Now that she's injured, she's the one that needs care, as opposed to her being the caregiver for her kids. So the first thing, and her husband. So the first question that I ask is not what are your finances. The first question I ask is, do you have a power of attorney? Did mom do proper estate planning? Is there someone who can access all of her bank records? Because the biggest impediment to qualifying for medical assistance in this situation isn't necessarily the amount of money they have. I mean, chances are they don't have a lot of money. The biggest impediment is getting bank records and getting information to the county assistance office so they can review whether they qualify for Medicaid. So you got about 3 different things going on here. I mean, I'm sure more than that, but you're dealing with 3 different programs. Mom can go and get services, assuming she qualifies, through the CHC waiver. And that's a program through Medicaid that is provided through what's called the Office of Long-Term Living. So it's a Medicaid waiver, so she has to qualify for Medicaid. Her intellectually disabled son goes into a different system. There's different waivers for persons that are intellectually disabled. They can provide services in the home as well to him. Although the way the ID waivers work is a little bit different than long-term living, than the CHC waiver. It's the same qualification for him. So he can qualify for ID waivers. The son that has mental health or needs mental health services, there's no mental health waiver. There is no waiver for a person who has psychiatric illnesses. That's going to come from the county. So the county is going to have to provide services to him. It may not be feasible for mom to go home, not because of a dangerous situation. Right now, I'm not seeing anyone in this home who can be a caregiver or can at least coordinate with the services that are going to come in the home. Waiver services are very good. They provide a lot of services and can keep people in the home. The problem is if the caregiver doesn't show up, if someone from the agency doesn't show up because they're sick, who contacts the agency? and tells them we need someone else. And what happens if there is a gap in those services. So I'm not seeing anyone right now who can do that. Maybe dad can, maybe the son who has mental health issues can do that if he's on his medications and if he's able to function. And maybe the person or the son who has who's intellectually disabled can do that as well if he's higher functioning. But right now, I don't know who's going to be the point person for this family in the community, because someone's going to have to coordinate all these services. Dave?
Anthony, I think that's a great point, that concept that there has to be a point person in the family who's a capable decision maker and capable of accessing services and capable of providing the financial information, all of those capabilities. And I think one of the things we're all saying is we see families who are managing, dividing the work, managing in a sort of symbiotic relationship until there's a crisis. But when there's a crisis, and there may be different crises, the son who has mental health issues may be the manager for a long time until he has a crisis, or the dad or the mom may be the manager until one of them has a decline or an illness or an injury or a crisis. So that's the scenario. What the scenario presents is that all of a sudden there's a gap in decision making in the family.
Can I just interject? I have a question for Jessica. Now, assuming that, and I understand what Anthony is saying, but let's assume that mom has capacity to make her own decision, and we all think it's a bad decision, but she goes home. And she's the one who makes sure her son gets his medication. And so during the hospitalization, son has stopped taking his medication, and the situation at home has erupted, not just because of her problems, but also because of the son's problems. What can be done? Because while we think that maybe it's not safe for her to go home, she needs this designated person, but there's nobody there to be that designated person. How do we intervene to make sure that even though it's, it is her decision to be home, that the situation is managed after she goes home?
That's a good question. That's about exactly the scenario where you might see a crisis program get involved, when what has been described as a symbiotic relationship in this family, and what so many people have identified as this really is a very common scenario. So many families lean into the resilience, the integrity of their family structure to hold what can be weakness becoming a collective strength. But at some points when that breaks down, like mom falls and isn't able any longer to contribute to what is a symbiotic sort of shared structure, you see some other pieces fall apart. So when a crisis program, when we come in and look at that scenario, there's obviously an assessment of immediate need and immediate intervention to support stability, but also an eye toward how do you support a return to the resilience of that family structure. How do you continue to respect the dignity of the family, respect their capacity to rejoin and continue forward? And then, of course, that family-centered planning, and oftentimes we say person-centered planning, but every person in this scenario has the need for their own person-centered planning as a part of that family collective. There's a lot of diagnoses here that's tempting to cause us to underestimate capacity. And, I always think it's important to stay hopeful, remembering that recovery is real, that people with even serious mental illness have an incredible capacity to be care providers, givers, sustainers in the system. So the opportunity to pour back into the gentleman who has a schizophrenia diagnosis so that he's able to regain that stability. You mentioned if he had lost it while mom was in the hospital, so that he can begin to play perhaps a different role. How does that family shift their dynamic in order to care for mom if her decision is to return home? And is it possible? What's the capacity that dad's bringing to that table? What's the capacity that the gentleman with an intellectual disability brings to that table, and how can they be enhanced? Some questions that we would want to know are what supports are already in place for this family. Many people have already mentioned what planning has already happened for the potential for a negative outcome. How would they sustain that? Has that been in place? Oftentimes when we arrive, that hasn't been in place yet. So creating the opportunity to support that moving forward, while also looking at what are the supports that are already in place that can be perhaps enhanced, increased in their level of intensity until the family has the capacity to sustain that more independently over time. So those are some of our big questions: are what's everyone's individual capacity? What's the need for each individual to achieve stability? And then how ultimately can we plan together to see that family reconstitute itself towards stability?
Jessica, assuming that mom or dad has sufficient capacity and wherewithal to pick up the phone and to call you and say, our son is not taking his meds and he's not really following his protocol. We've seen some decline while mom was in the hospital. Are there services or is there some assistance that you can provide to help kind of right the ship with that son in the interim? He may not be as far gone as to need any kind of inpatient hospitalization or anything like that. He just may need some counseling or some other assistance. Are there any services? I know the mental health system works much differently than the ID system or the Medicaid waiver system, but is there anything at all that you can steer them to?
Absolutely. Montgomery County makes a very significant investment in crisis services in our county. So the mobile crisis can come to the home, can meet with that gentleman and support him in whatever level of care, intervention, or response it would be necessary. We have a robust relationship with our crisis partners at MCES and local emergency departments to support rapid response if that gentleman did need a higher level of care or more acute intervention. And we would absolutely look to partner with the community-based supports that he may already be connected to. Maybe there was some disengagement during the time that mom was hospitalized. How do we build that connection or reconnect? And then partner together to enhance their capacity to be an acute responder until he's able to stabilize a little bit.
We have a question someone posted in the chat, which is, can anyone comment about respite services, temporary services? And, I don't know how, I actually don't know. So I'll look to all our experts to tell us how available are they? When could they be available? Any kind of respite services? And there may be different answers depending upon who's receiving the services, but.
I can jump in. Oh, go ahead, Sarah.
Oh, I just want to say real quick, for us, it's always a matter of finances. Respite services are all private pay. So if they have private pay, we can do it. If they don't, we can't.
Actually, the waivers provide respite services as well. The problem I've always seen is the availability of getting the respite services. There just aren't a lot available. So I know the ID waivers do provide respite, and basically in respite services, I don't deal with respite a lot, but basically what the services are is they're a break for the caregiver. So the son who has an intellectual disability might be in another facility for a short period of time. So the parents can have a break from caring for him, or they bring in, or the parents go somewhere else and someone else, provides services to their son in the home. So those kind of services, are available through the waivers. They're also available through the CHC waiver, but there's just not a lot of availability for them. In other words, they're out there. There just aren't a lot of people to provide them. I don't know if that's what other people's.
So then functionally, as Sarah said, if the waiver program would provide them, but there are no providers or a few providers and a huge waiting list. So functionally, it ends up being that it's mostly private pay if you can even get that. Is that sort of what I'm hearing?
I do think Elliott might be able to talk a little bit about the respite program in Pennsylvania and the federal funding for respite, which is not tied to Medicaid.
Sure, absolutely. So, the challenges that have already been discussed regarding respite are absolutely real in our world as well. So, facility availability and beds, if you're going to do a placement respite stay, is difficult to achieve most of the time. It can be provided through the Medicaid waiver. It is not something that we can really provide much of in our options program because the funding for that program is smaller. And we have a cap on what we can spend on an individual in a given month. So because of that, our services and options are primarily used throughout, the weekend shifts of up to 6 hours a week is primarily what people can get. So if you're looking for an overnight or weekend respite, that kind of falls outside of what our abilities are. But we do provide some respite support through our caregiver support program, which is maybe what Diane was referencing. So we do have a program that's specific to caregivers, older adults who are caring for children in the home, who are adults with intellectual disabilities are one of those populations we serve. And we encourage folks in that program to utilize respite services, and we support their ability to do that through some reimbursement of their own pay for respite. So that is a limitation of our program. We can reimburse for things through the caregiver support program, but we don't have any direct funding. So you have to have the means to set it up and then seek our support and reimbursement. So a very challenging thing to provide respite for folks, even though it's such a needed service.
Elliott, it's probably a good idea to explain the difference between the options program and the CHC waiver.
Oh, absolutely. So the CHC waiver program is Medicaid, and the options program is dollars that come down through the Department of Aging and the Aging Block Grant. So they're separate pots of money, and there are separate criteria financially and medically for both of those programs. You can be eligible for a nursing facility stay or not eligible for a nursing facility stay and be a part of options. If you're going to be part of the waiver program, you have to be found eligible for a nursing facility stay. So that's kind of the primary differences I see between the two.
Yeah, and my understanding with options is it's a sliding scale where you may contribute money to pay for the care, and Medicaid is basically free, for lack of a better term, and options is funded, I think, through the state lottery, or primarily through the state lottery.
Some state lottery funds, correct. They do make up a good portion of our service budget. So when you see those ads that say it benefits older Pennsylvanians, that is absolutely true. The groundhog isn't lying to you. Yeah, but yes, there is a sliding scale for services. A cost share is what we call it. It's something that doesn't come to my mind all that often because most of the folks who apply for our services tend to not have a cost share at all. But if you are a higher income person, you may be expected to pay for a portion of the services you receive, and that's all determined by our assessment process and opening someone to the program.
And also there's another program similar to options for people that options is for people that are age 60 and over. There's a program for people 18 to 59 called Act 150. It's called the Attendant Care Waiver. That's also funded through state funds as opposed to Medicaid.
And in the case of this scenario, for the gentleman with an intellectual disability, respite can be a part of his planned use of waiver services. So if in this scenario, it's identified that he needs some special care or services, part of his person-centered and then ultimately family planning would be to have a conversation with his supports coordinator about adding respite services and as a part of his waiver. That can be planned, a host family can be identified, the relationship can be built, and that can be a planful opportunity for him to have a different setting, which does, as named, give some relief to the family and also gives him a different environment where he can continue to develop.
Can I say one thing about the cost of the services? So while Medicaid services are free, there is something that often sneaks up on people, either once they sign up or when the family member receiving services passes, which is we do have Medicaid estate recovery. Fortunately for most people, there are exceptions or waivers or exceptions that protect assets like a family home, but this is something that is explained to applicants when they apply, which is that no lien attaches to your home when you apply for services, but the state does try to recover the costs that they have put into the care for the long-term services once the person receiving them has passed away. And if a home is owned jointly by spouses, there's no issue. There's also lots of exceptions for children residing in the home, children under 21, disabled children, but it is something to just be aware of, especially if it's a scenario a little different than this one. For our scenario, I see plenty of ways that it seems like probably we'd obviously want to look at the deed and make sure that the ownership of the house. It looks like there's ways to protect this asset because there are children who are adults but disabled. They use the standard that Social Security uses. which another plug here is make sure these children, these adult children are connected with Social Security services. They're probably eligible for SSI if they've never worked. And that would give some much needed income to the family.
I think you make a great point, Kate. I think the two fears that people have are that, number one, if once we get involved in these different programs, we're going to lose all control. The government is going to come in and run things. And the second thing is the government is going to come in and take all of our money. And I don't think either of those could be further from the truth. But the fact of the matter is, this is not do-it-yourself brain surgery, which,
Right.
as we know,
I mean,
never
it's not
works and is always
completely-
messy.
It's not completely untrue, David, right? I mean, if in some circumstances, the government will come take the family's money, the family home, if there's no one living in the home who's entitled to live there, if there are no exemptions. So, I
Well,
mean, maybe,
true.
you know,
Well,
But the perception, Judge, just to push back a little bit, the perception is it happens in all cases, and there are a lot of good programs that are available to deserving people. What I think you're referencing is maybe overly entitled children and things like that. And there are a lot of other complicating factors. But getting back to our scenario, we have some deserving people who we don't know what their asset situation is right now. And the only way to sift through that is using someone like Kate or Anthony or going to Elliott to work out what you're eligible for.
so
Can I also
can-
just interject here and ask a question of some of you here who might be able to help with this? In that family, as I look at the scenario and I see two quite elderly people and two sons who are dependent, and so even maintaining their home, what happens when the parents are gone? And has planning been done? And it seems like this is a ripe time to intervene and make sure that things are in place. And what would you do to help this family to make sure that these two young men can be taken care of or can take care of themselves or whatever, as when mom and dad aren't there anymore? Or,
Well, I mean,
mom
the
may
first
end up.
thing I would ask would be, assuming, let's say that mom doesn't have a power of attorney, but she can, she does have capacity, then the first thing would be she needs an estate plan. The second question I would ask would be about the intellectually disabled son, because chances are he is not going to have a power of attorney, because the definition of intellectual disability is essentially you had a deficit in your intellect prior to age 21. So he would not be able to execute a power of attorney unless he was very high functioning. My question would be, does he have a guardian? Are the parents his guardian? And the question for the other son who has mental health issues is, does he have a mental health power of attorney, or does he have a regular power of attorney? So does he have a decision maker? So for the son that's intellectually disabled, my question to the family would be, so now you all have to take care of mom. Can you take care of mom plus the intellectually disabled son? Because there's other options in the community for him that are provided by the waiver. So there's there's several waivers in the ID system. Usually what they do is they provide money and services to someone in the ID son's situation where he lives at home, either $33,000 in services per year or $70,000, depending on which waiver you get. There's another waiver called the consolidated waiver, and that will pay for his care in what's called a community living arrangement. The CLA is it's not a facility, it's a place in the community with 1, 2, 3, or 4 persons who are intellectually disabled, where services come into their home and provide services to them. So at some point, best case scenario for son with ID would be to be in the community receiving services, but they probably would not be provided by his parents. Another option would be the son who has mental health issues, but I'm not sure, I don't know enough about his situation to say that he could provide the services. So there's options for the son with ID to leave the home, but still remain in the community. So that would be that would be one thing I would say is, when is that going to happen? And is that part of their plan long-term?
one of the things that's great about the way that you framed this, Anthony, is So we have a family who has a crisis. Mom is injured and goes to the hospital, and it throws things into confusion and exposes a lack of planning, but it also provides, if they can get good advice, an opportunity to say, okay, mom can come back home. Let's support mom in the home. Let's make this work. But also, what's the plan for 5-10 years down the road? What's the plan for when mom and dad are gone? Because maybe the two sons can't manage in the home without mom and dad. And if that's true, and I don't know if that's true, that needs to be, but if they have supports, it would be ideal for someone to be asking those questions and saying, the intellectually disabled son, this is a good moment for us to look into and plan for community-based services, community living arrangement for the son who has intellectual disabilities, and get him on track towards that move while mom and dad are living and can support him in the move, and before there's another crisis, right? And a real drop off in ability to manage in the home. One of the things that raises is, we started this with saying mom is 85 and she goes to the hospital. Now she's got care providers at the hospital making discharge plans for her, seeing whether she can go home, and looking at a narrow issue, or relatively narrow issue, about mom is the patient, mom's safety, mom's future. How do we expand that and involve the other service providers who would be necessary to say, maybe we need to be making a longer term plan for the intellectually disabled son, or the son who has, as we said, with mobile crisis, has mental health issues. And if he may not be in a crisis, but if he is, we know what to do. What if he's not in a crisis, but just needs a little more long-term planning? How are we going to engage those services in this home?
From the hospital's point of view, we do have that narrow viewpoint, but if we have a really good case manager or social worker, and we refer them to a really good home care nurse or social worker, oftentimes if there's an issue like this, we will, when we refer to home care, include a social work consult in the home care services to get a better idea. Of course, this falls through the cracks so easily, but we at the hospital have the luxury of making the referral and then pretending everything works out just fine. And after that, we don't have a whole lot of control.
As far as the intellectually disabled son, Your Honor, I would start with whether he has a guardian, and that's probably a case where you just need to have a guardian, because mom and dad are not going to be able to provide services to him long term, and the question is going to be who will be his decision maker, since he can't execute a power of attorney. He's obviously, unless, like I said, he's very high functioning, he's obviously very likely to require a guardian. One of the questions is going to be, who would his guardian be? It may be a family member, or it may be a professional. Assuming it's a professional, there needs to be a way to pay the professional. And he's likely only going to have Social Security, disability, or SSI. There is a way that mom and dad can transfer their assets to a trust for the intellectually disabled son, and they can provide for his care in addition to Medicaid. So he is eligible to have what's called a special needs trust because he's disabled. Mom and dad can essentially transfer their home. They can transfer all of their excess assets or excess resources to a trust for his what's called sole benefit. And at that point, you would have a supplemental fund plus Medicaid for him while he's in the community. That's one way that the parents can not only qualify for Medicaid, they can avoid the issues that were brought up about estate recovery. One thing I'll mention about estate recovery, not to get too far off the question, but as long as there is a disabled child, estate recovery is postponed until the death of that child, as well as a spouse. So when all of these individuals, now it's a little more complex because the executor of the estate has to protect these assets for Medicaid, and you want to make these transfers prior to mom and dad passing. But essentially, these assets can still be available to the family as long as one of the disabled children or the spouse is alive.
one of the questions in the chat, which is a question I was about to ask, what is, when we talk about the group homes, my experience is that there are long waiting lists. Can you give us an update on what it's like in Montgomery County? Because again, you know, we're racing against time with this family. Is that available?
And I don't know if Anthony or Kate or who here could talk about community living sites in Montgomery County, or I don't know if you're up to date on that.
I haven't seen a huge, there was an issue with access to the waiver and access to facilities years ago. I haven't seen that. There's a lot more funding that I've seen recently. The issue usually isn't getting into a CLA. The issue usually is getting on a consolidated waiver, because the county does not want to release those funds until there is an emergency. They consider an emergency when mom and dad both die and there's nobody there. And I hate to say that, but that is the truth. Until there's an emergency, they don't want people to get the consolidated waiver funds because those funds are scarce. So in this case, I think this would qualify as an emergency because there is no caretaker anymore for the son that's intellectually disabled. Once he gets on a consolidated waiver, I haven't seen too much of a delay in getting into a community living arrangement.
I would say we haven't, I think that the biggest concerns we're seeing right now is actually with there's a scarcity of direct care workers. So in this type of scenario, if neither child or the spouse are able to be the sort of the care provider and they go through an agency and hire somebody else, just currently there's a massive shortage. There was one before the pandemic. The pandemic has made it much, much harder for so many reasons. The wages are far too low. People are struggling with childcare. There's fear of going into homes because of COVID. So there's legislation pending that Senator Casey has introduced to address these shortfalls, but they are really, really critical right now. There's definitely not enough attention being paid to this this industry and what workers are experiencing and how that impacts everyone.
And this is not a fast process. So it comes back again to individual planning, family planning. If a family is anticipating that at some point, they want to see their loved one into a CLA arrangement, they want to have that conversation sooner than later.
I think the son with intellectual disabilities will be much easier to get into the system than mom. My experience has been there's a lot of headwinds with trying to get the community health choices waiver. I mean, unless they are absolutely destitute, they're still going to have to provide bank records and they're still going to have to qualify. And there's a lot of things, and this is a case where you have a husband and a wife. You have to take into consideration that, you could spend all their money and get mom qualified for Medicaid. But if you don't do that properly, how's dad going to survive? What happens when one of them passes away? So you have to think, strategically, what's the best way to, secure enough money for both of them to remain in the community and to get these healthcare services. And it really depends on how much, money they have. So,
so Anthony, that you're asking a question and it dovetails a little bit with a question that's in the Q&A right now, which is, we have, and I just want to re-articulate what I think you've all said. There are different types of services that may be available depending upon your income and asset level. So some individuals qualify for medical assistance, long-term care benefits, and if they qualify both medically that they would need long-term care and financially that they qualify for Medicaid, then they may be eligible for community health choices. Is that right? As a waiver of the Medicaid program.
Yes.
But you're saying it's really hard to qualify and there's a long process to qualify for community health choices. I think that's what I heard everyone say. So even before you get anybody coming to the home to help out, there's this application process, there's this financial disclosure. And I don't know about all of you, but I've seen parties who, are very reluctant to make the financial disclosures. They're not facile with it. They may not be capable of doing it, or they may be fearful about doing the financial disclosure to get themselves qualified for the benefits. Is that a fair statement?
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, I've had many cases where we really struggle with that, and that the counseling around that can take a lot of time and really delay the process, and that's a huge part of what we do with clients.
We
Well,
have
yeah.
a question in the chat, if you don't mind, and this kind of ties into what you're talking about now, is around a family that actually has resources
Right.
and has someone in 24-hour care, spending $200,000 a year. And so obviously, I would guess they're spending down unless they have unlimited resources. And so the question that's being asked is, is there a way, is there a place, an organization that helps family make these kinds of decisions, review their resources to decide how they should be getting services?
If they have those kind of resources, they need an attorney. I mean, this family needs an attorney. There's no question about that.
But
that's
so
not
that's what I was going to just kind of go through. So we have if the people qualify for medical assistance and have low assets and low income, you're in one group. Then there's another group a little bit above that, but not extraordinarily affluent, who may qualify for the options program in Montgomery County and in other counties that's funded by the state, but not by Medicaid, right? And the options program, Elliott, did you say that can provide up to 6 hours a week of in-home care?
Correct. Yes. With the current guidelines from the state, that's the amount. And we tend to see that either in 3 2-hour shifts or 2 3-hour shifts. And to Kate's point earlier about the direct care worker shortage, we've had to shift a lot of care plans from 2 hours to 3 hours just to get aides into the home because of the low wages and the lack of structure in home care right now. So I'm also very excited that there has been some legislation introduced to try and look at that at a more macro level, because it's just something we can't really make a dent in here at the county level.
And
Can I also
to,
just interject? I just wanted to interject one more thing about this particular family that has these resources, is that it's certainly possible that they could spend down all of their resources and not be eligible for the waiver because of income. And so they may be eligible for a nursing home, but not the waiver because the income is too high for the waiver. And so that's a problem that people have. Because it's a small amount of money, but sometimes it can be a small amount of money, but the income is more critical with home community-based services than it is for nursing homes, where you can spend down. You can't spend down in the community.
I don't have any doubt that, this family is going to be qualified for Medicaid.
Well, if their income is such that they're not, there's an income level for home and community-based services that is, if you have a family with these kinds of resources, they may have pension, Social Security that brings them above the income level. And there's in Pennsylvania, we have no forgiveness for that, no waiver for that. It's something we are advocating for.
Yeah, you can spend down income. You can spend down
not
income.
in home and community-based services.
Yes,
in
you can
CHC.
spend down income in Pennsylvania.
Okay, well, we can disagree on that.
Well, no, you can spend down income in Pennsylvania. So, I can get into the technical part of why that's permissible, but every state allows you to spend down income if your gross monthly income exceeds what's called a special income limit. So, yeah, you can spend down income, and I've had several cases where I've been successful in spending down a person. As a matter of fact, like every
Or
case.
CHC.
so can I just
Many.
can I interject here to try to make this a little more understandable for those of us who are not experts in this? And when the questions in the chat and the Q&A are very good. So I think we established this community health choices program for the Medicaid eligible, and we'll talk about whether you can spend down income and what that means in a minute. Then there's the options program, but as we discussed, it's this home service. You need only people who really need minimal home services. Someone who is really qualified for long-term care needs daily services, 12 hours a day or 24 hours a day. Options is not going to be enough. It is going to be enough for someone who needs a modest amount of services, and then they can stay in their home. They need some cleaning, some food prep, some hygiene twice a week, but they don't need daily orientation. So, let's be clear about how limited that is in terms of who can be, not that it's really important and valuable for keeping some people at home, but at the same time, there are situations where it's not going to be enough. And then the family that mentions having 24-hour care for an older adult at home, living in the home, and how expensive that is on an annual basis to have 24-hour round-the-clock care at home. And this is a dilemma we also see all the time. Do you move mom or dad into a nursing home? Is a nursing home more economical? Probably more economical than 24-hour round-the-clock one-on-one care. Is it better? You know, that's a decision every family has to make about what does this person need and what kind of care are they getting. Another issue is who's supervising the 24-hour care in the home. Because if no one is present, if dad is not living and mom needs 24-hour care and I mean, it's one thing if dad is living and supervising the care and accepting the care. It's the one thing if the sons are in the home and accepting the care and cooperating with the care, but someone absolutely all alone with stranger care providers, you know, there can be opportunities, not that this is frequent, but, you know, there can be opportunities for exploitation or other problems or neglect to develop with no one really watching what's going on. So, you know, these are complicated scenarios. They can be very expensive to provide adequate care. And I think just to be frank in answering the question was asked, is there any organization that helps families review these decisions when you have significant assets? I guess that what I would say, and Elliott, maybe you can speak to this is, and maybe Kate, you know, yes, lawyers can be consulted and an attorney about, do I have a plan that makes sense for the family and how long is it going to last? Some financial consultants may have enough expertise to help consult about this. And if there are any concerns, certainly that blend into the area of the potential for neglect, abuse, or exploitation, then I think a call to protective services or another call to senior services to talk about the whole scenario, make sure the person is getting adequate care and their resources are being spent on them, seems appropriate to me. But Elliott, do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, no, exactly what you said is accurate. I mean, we need to make sure that we're available as the Office of Senior Services to guide folks through that process. And for individuals who do have, you know, significant assets, there are plenty of private case management entities out there. I'm not as familiar with them. You know, we work primarily with lower income folks, but if you do have resources, a quick Google can get you plenty of, you know, licensed social workers who run managed care groups who provide resources and develop care plans for individuals who don't qualify for county-based services or Medicaid-based services.
One of the questions in the chat room was about another resource that we haven't even touched on yet, and that was the possibility that there are veterans benefits that are available for aid in attendance. And I'm not the person to answer that question, but either Kate, Anthony, or Elliott, if any of you have any familiarity, how might that assist bringing some either financial assistance or aid or services into the home? And what's the process for that? Is it a timely one, or is it a long drawn out process?
Long drawn out.
Well, yeah, long drawn out is what
Really
I would
long.
say. We have interacted with some folks who are on the aid and attendant waiver in our office. And if folks are interested in that, we can refer them directly to our Office of Veterans Affairs at the county, who are very supportive of that process. As Anthony said, it's very long, so sometimes there's a lot of hand-holding to get folks through that. There's lots of documentation requirements regarding their service and things like that. And the benefits vary depending on qualifications, but it can support some individuals pretty well in the community with some hours of home support and personal care services. We have seen success there.
Yeah, this probably isn't that case though, because the VA would probably be involved in this case 5 to 10 years earlier before mom broke her hip, assuming they needed the services. That would be when you're getting VA services, because the VA basically provides cash. They provide cash for you to purchase the services, but they don't through what's called the VA pension. And with the pension, there's homebound services and there's aid and attendance. And what they do is they provide a level of cash to the veteran and or the widow of the veteran. So yes, there are some, basically cash can come into the family. But that sometimes what happens with VA benefits is they interfere with things like Medicaid, because then they increase the amount of income that a person has. So they can be problematic, but I'm not sure with this level of services that would probably be needed in this case. This is anything other than mom getting medical assistance, long-term care benefits through the waiver.
In the chat, someone had, or the question and answer, someone has mentioned that there's a vet assist program that will bring a caregiver into the home while the application is still being processed. So I wasn't aware of that, but apparently the Veterans Administration has a program to provide caregivers and not have that have to wait until the application has been approved. So
I want, if we can, just get back to a point that Anthony talked about. I think it's overarching in this whole discussion is that there has to be a point person at some point in time for all these different things to happen, because there's a lot of moving pieces and a lot of moving pieces for a lot of individuals in this picture. So I'm getting the sense, though, that there are perhaps different point people involved with respect to the individuals that are in there. Judge Murphy, I want to direct this question to you if I can. We have an individual here who is an ID individual, perhaps now in need of greater services in terms of decision-making than he's ever had before. Are there options short of guardianship for him if we need to make decisions for him that have been utilized through the court system?
well, thanks for that question. And yeah, I think it's important to mention that, we always want to see the individual be able to make his or her own decisions and have his or her own autonomy respected to the maximum extent possible. And we are instructed by the legislature, by the legislation, to use the least restrictive alternative all the time. So, and we want to avoid guardianship where it's not needed. And other panelists have talked about this, how it's an assessment of whether the person is able to make and effectuate their own decisions or not, and to what extent they have or lack capacity to do what. So for the intellectually disabled younger man or middle-aged man, it sounds like from this scenario, obviously we don't know, that the parents have been the primary caregivers and perhaps decision makers or supported decision makers for the intellectually disabled adult for most of his life, and that he's lived with the parents for most of his life from the scenario, from what we know. So he has family member decision makers who may not be court-appointed guardians. And it is possible for someone to continue to have family decision makers and healthcare representatives who can help with healthcare decisions who are not court-appointed guardians. The question is, it's kind of a sophisticated legal and capacity evaluation. What is he going to need if mom and dad are gone? And what is he going to be able to do if mom and dad are gone? And what other family resources does he have if mom and dad are gone? He has a brother who it seems at this point that he lives with, and we don't really have a sense from the short hypothetical of how capable his brother is of assisting him and supporting him. And we don't know, but it needs to be evaluated. Can these two men, could they stay in the home? Could they manage the home? Can they manage their finances? If mom and dad are gone, we don't really know the answers to those questions. If they're not sufficiently capable and don't have enough income coming in to continue to manage their own home after mom and dad are gone, it's a crisis for both of them potentially on the horizon. But there's time to plan for that and assess that. And there's also time to see, can the brother, even though he has mental health issues, is he a good decision maker for his brother? Is he able to help him with healthcare decisions, residential decisions, financial decisions? Because if he's high functioning and capable, maybe that is the right solution. Maybe there's a sister we don't know about, or a cousin or a niece or an aunt or someone else we don't know about who has long time been a supportive family member to this family who might be a resource. So I think it's a complicated family dynamic that needs a sophisticated approach to determine who's making the decisions, who's the best person to make decisions, and what are the options for the person with intellectual disability.
I think you're really speaking into the value of engagement in trust building. And it's so easy for us to overlook the necessity of that, building that bridge. There's so many vulnerable decisions that need to be made. These are our children, this is our money, this is our estate, this is our whole life coming down to this one moment. Do we trust the person that's acting as a point resource for us? and the necessity for us as community-based providers to go that extra step to make sure, number one, that we've built sufficient engagement to support these decisions. And number two, that we're really creative and investigative around our capacity to find the right people that matter in their lives and get them involved.
I think as an attorney, I can't stress enough how much before we even can get into what the law provides and what the law can do, we have to have these discussions that Jessica's talking about, because there's so many emotions wrapped into this. And I keep thinking in this scenario, especially of how the parents likely want to protect their children and continue to do as much as they can, even when they're in need, and how much I would need to engage probably with other providers because I'm not a social worker, I'm not a mental health professional, but I can issue spot. And these are issues that come up with so many of the cases we see, because you have these complex family dynamics and relationships and fears. And when you have a crisis like this, we know what the law provides, but we have to get people in the relationships, sort of everything clear, the goals, the needs, all of that before we really rush into the legal solution. And then as Anthony said, it's hard because this is not a quick process. So that's why you need so many people working together to really stabilize a family.
I think that's one of the problems in the hospital is we're so focused on discharge planning and length of stay and you know, not letting people stay in the hospital too long for their own safety and for other reasons. And so we often jump to, well, we'll get a guardian. And that's even before the care manager has sat down with the family and said, you know, done a really good psychosocial history, and because that's really time consuming. And it's so much easier to just call me and say, we're going to get a guardian, but it is like you said, it's so much more complicated than just a legal response. And I think I have to say, credit Judge Murphy with being really, really thorough in our hearings to make sure that this is the least restrictive alternative for the patient.
Yeah, we have a question in the chat, I guess, and I'm not quite sure the perspective, but it says, how can guardianship be expedited in Montgomery County? And I guess my response would be, as Sarah just said, you know, I think all of the people on this panel understand that guardianship is the last resort and not the least restrictive alternative. I think that not only do the courts scrutinize it, but most of the time the petitioners, including the Office of Senior Services, including the hospitals, really scrutinize the case before they're even willing to file a petition for guardianship, because it is not the favored or least restrictive alternative. It may not be a good solution for the family. We don't want to impose it on families where it's not appropriate. We do want to make it available to families where it's critical to getting the finances organized, and even if in the short term, to getting someone the care they need. So it's always a balance. We're not in the business of denying guardianship where it's needed, but we are in the business of scrutinizing guardianship to determine whether it's needed. And that's always the balance that I think we see.
Your Honor, how would you analyze a case involving mom? Does mom need a guardian? And does your analysis change if dad's passed away?
So for this, I mean, we're kind of going back to our scenario. We clearly don't have enough information here to make that assessment. I mean, we would need, and we always need in every case, a medical evaluation or a psychological or psychiatric evaluation of the individual to determine their capacity. And capacity is a broad term that exists on a spectrum and includes capacity to do a lot of different things. So mom's capacity to make her own decisions about whether she wants to go home and can manage her finances and her household safely and can accept the care that she needs, you know, there's a lot of factors that even go into that assessment. I couldn't tell you from this scenario what she needs, but I think you are right that, as all of you are saying, it's a psychosocial assessment too, because the social supports in the home are relevant to how capable mom or dad is going to be when they're together, as opposed to if one of them is acting alone and has no supports or little support. Similarly, the capabilities of the sons come into play. You know, all of it is relevant to, can this family unit function and make responsible day-to-day decisions about cleaning the home, hygiene, food, providing for each other, and paying their bills. They've been doing that, from what we understand. We think the family unit has been doing that for years before this fall. Is mom the critical person who's the glue that holds it together? You know, we don't know that. We may assume that, but we don't know that. Might be why this crisis has come to our attention. Mom has only had a fall. There's no evidence she has any form of dementia, psychosis, mental illness in this scenario. It could be. I mean, we might find out when we get to know mom and evaluate mom, but at the moment, that's not presented as a given, nor is that presented with respect to dad. So we would assume, absent evidence to the contrary, that mom and dad are functional decision makers, and that mom needs support at home because of a physical limitation and her need to rehab from her fall and her injury. But you know, but what's been going on while mom's been out of the home, not cooking, not managing the kitchen, not managing the cleaning? Those are questions we do need to have a little bit more information to understand, and understand whether mom will continue to have both the physical ability and the capacity to accept the care that's needed to make sure the home is functioning safely for all of the residents.
Well, one of the
Judge,
things I should
it
point out,
also, I'm sorry, Anthony, go ahead.
one of the things I should point out is, I mean, whether, assuming mom doesn't need a guardian, it's probably clear that, you know, in the short term or maybe long term, she's going to have mobility issues. One of the things I did see, and I have dealt with before, is these waivers will actually pay for modifications to the home to make the home accessible for mom. Now, I know that's not a quick process either. There have to be dollars for that, but that is something that's available for mom if they don't have money. If they wanted to do, if mom and dad in this scenario did have money, that's one of the ways they could spend their money to qualify for Medicaid, is to put in a handicapped accessible shower, for example, or put a ramp in the house. I mean, it's all situation dependent, but that's one of the first things I would think of is, you know, making the home as accessible to mom and as safe for mom as possible.
Judge, it occurs to me that one of the things that we've seen in a number of cases, I know certainly from working with Sarah's people at Abington, is that we sometimes have emergency guardianships that don't necessarily morph into permanent plenary guardianships either. We have somebody who comes in and helps stabilize the situation, whether it's a nurse case manager type person or someone who is adept in financial issues to help get the waivers. And it may be able, until mom's physical abilities or even perhaps her mental assessment has improved over a short period of time, but we need somebody on an emergency basis to step in and make some decisions. But it doesn't necessarily mean that emergency has to lead into a permanent plenary guardianship. And Anthony is right, you know, bringing in those services that would make modifications in the house that are needed now, not a month from now when we decide about the guardianship, is kind of necessary. So maybe there's a way to look at the emergency process as that, not so much as defining what things are going to be like in 2, 3, 4 months and saying it has to lead to a permanent guardianship. It may not.
I agreed, although I think that if there are a way to access care management services, consultation services in the home, I think actually the modifications to the home is a really good point, because we certainly have seen cases where, I guess as I would say it, you know, there wouldn't be, mom is being moved to a nursing home because there are stairs and she can't have access to the bathroom, and the house isn't physically appropriate for her while she recovers. But really, it's not what she wants or what anyone wants, and it's not in the best interest of the family. And if there are funds available for modifications like a ramp or like a accessible shower, those things can make a huge difference in whether someone is capable of returning home And all of that, I think, I always think appointing a guardian, even an emergency guardian, and we're willing to do it on a temporary basis when it's necessary, but at the same time, it's an aggressive thing to do to a family. It's a disruptive thing to do. It would be better to do things in a supportive way. Sometimes the guardianship may be supportive. If a family is not capable of getting their finances disclosed to qualify for what they need to qualify for, then maybe a guardian who can help with the finances in the short term is necessary. So I'm not saying it's not necessary, but I think we need to be discriminating about when we use that.
If mom in our scenario does go into a nursing home, let's say for a couple of months, she can still transition out of the nursing home into the community. It's not a permanent situation. And there is, the waivers are provided through private insurance companies now. So the department pays Independence Blue Cross, for example, to provide the waiver services. They can transition people from a nursing home to the community and put them on a waiver. I haven't seen it happen much, and I haven't actually seen it work, but that's out there. There is something called nursing home transition that the Department of Human Services is now doing. I wasn't able to find much information on it, but I know this is out there, and I know that these insurance companies would probably want people to transition from a nursing home into the community because it's less money that they have to pay.
We do nursing home transition work pretty frequently.
Okay.
I think the big challenge becomes getting the things like home modifications, chair lifts, chair gliders, bathroom modifications in place. The big issue becomes when someone needs 24-hour care, because there's a break-even point where it becomes financially beneficial to not have someone in a nursing home. And then depending on how many hours of care someone needs, that is a good portion of the work we spend is advocating for older adults and individuals with disabilities who need more hours, and than the insurance company believes they do. And the same with home modifications. So
I absolutely see the same thing.
Yeah, nursing home transition definitely is 100% something that does work. There's a service coordinator who is sort of the point person for the process within the managed care organization. There's 3 over Pennsylvania that have the CHC contracts. It's UPMC, Keystone First, known as AmeriHealth Caritas, outside of the 5-county region in the Southeast, and PA Health and Wellness. And people can choose between those 3. But it does, things get, as anyone who's experienced anything with insurance companies know, it's not fast, it's not easy, and they always want you to have less than you want. So
we have a question for Mr. Smith in the chat room dealing with the home with changes and modifications in the home. Does Montgomery County offer home assessment visits and expert recommendations such as mobility modifications, accessible showers, ramps, etc., even if the senior has assets to pay for those items?
We do not provide that service directly. We do provide some minor modifications through options. Again, we have a cap on what we can spend, so they are minor. They don't go beyond. We can put in grab bars and things like that. And we have a contract with someone who goes out to do in-home assessments, who is a PT or OT person. But if we receive a call from someone who would be private pay, we tend to just provide resources on, who they can reach out to for that kind of assessment. Because again, we would be able to do very minimal support for those types of activities through options. And there's also a cap on it in the options program. We can only spend up to a certain dollar amount on home modifications.
So if they're over-resourced, that you can give them the name of potential people to do the assessment, but that cost factor would be on that.
Correct. Yes, we keep a list of private entities who will support that process for those who need it. Absolutely.
Yeah, Dave, I believe also that's something the service coordinator would have to do as well through the waiver. So if they're qualified for waiver, regardless of what funds they have, if they're qualified for the waiver, they qualify for the waiver. So, and if they're entitled to services to get their home modified, that's really a question of, not do they have the money to pay for it themselves? The question is, can you get the insurance company to do it? That's really the only question.
How do you find a good geriatric case manager in a situation like this without worrying about whether they have their own agenda, like eventually they're going to get mom into a nursing home, or they're going to get them to this home health agency that they have this deal with on the side. That you want an unbiased, completely straightforward assessment of mom to try to help things along. How do you find those people? Sarah, do you provide them to families when they're?
Yeah, I do. You know, it seems like there's a new case management or home care agency opening up every day. So there's so many to choose from, but I generally, I mean, I've been doing this for a long time. So there are some people that I know and some organizations that have been around for a long time. And my rationale, my logic is, if they were bad, they wouldn't still be around. We would have heard about them in the papers or something. So I think that, you know, any good agency who is in this for the long haul is going to want to protect their reputation. And so they're going to be on the up and up. You know, we saw, well, I forget what the name of that movie was, but boy, did that give a bad picture of case management and guardianships. I don't see that at all, really.
The good news is if they're bad, you can always fire them. I mean, you're never stuck with your service coordinator. You can change them as often as you want.
I just wanted to just say that our organization provides unbiased help with finding agencies or handling issues or problems that people might have. And so I encourage, I'll put the our website and our phone number in the chat so people have that. But if you do have a question, please call us. Thank you.
Is that for Philadelphia and Montgomery now, Diane?
It's for wherever you live. We don't care where people live, whatever. You don't have to live in any particular county or state. So.
Other questions? Does anybody listening have questions either in the chat or the question and answer? You can put them in there. Or to our panelists, are there topics that you were hoping you would get a chance to talk about that we haven't had a chance to talk about yet?
I guess I can just kind of add, I mean, we've touched on protective services briefly, but let's just imagine in this scenario that everything went the wrong way, that everything was a crisis when we walked into that door. If Jess's, mobile crisis team went out and, oh, it's clearly, something beyond what we could support and it's an urgent need, that's when a call to older adult protective services in our office would be appropriate, because we can immediately intervene in situations. Say someone is appropriate for the aging waiver program, but we know that takes ages sometimes to get into. We can provide immediate support and get them through that process and kind of hold and case manage the case until we have them in a steady place and they get the support that they need. And also for the sons, keep in mind that there is an adult protective services entity in Pennsylvania as well. We're separate. So our office serves those 60 and older, and then APS serves those 59 to 18, and then 18 below is Childline. But we are the point for referrals for both of those entities, for OAPS and APS. So a call to our hotline will get you support for anyone of any age. It will take a report on any person. And I will put the hotline number and our information in the chat as well.
A couple of people have mentioned also about the shortage of care workers, especially now in the pandemic. And there is a program through waiver services whereby family members can become caretakers. But Anthony, would you direct the process that people have to go through? It's not as if mom can just say, I want my, my niece to be my caretaker and she's going to be paid X number of dollars. How do you go about getting a family member who can step in and be a care worker, but can't afford to step away from their job, still need some kind of an income stream to be able to provide services to mom, short-term or long-term? What do they need to do?
I've dealt with that issue. Basically, what has to happen, assuming that, well, let's just start from the beginning. Mom gets qualified for waiver services, and part of the package that they're going to provide her is a certain number of hours per week of in-home care. That in-home care needs to be provided by somebody, and she can go to an organization and they can provide her with an aide, or she can have a family member or a friend provide the care. What I've seen is the easiest way to do this is to actually have that family member or friend go to an agency and coordinate that way through your what's called the service coordinator, where they are essentially hired to provide those services. The family member gets paid a certain amount, and a certain amount goes to the care agency, and it's all paid for by the waiver. The only I haven't seen the criteria I saw when I dealt with this issue was you need to have a driver's license, and they can't have, I think it was hepatitis. So, so the criteria to provide in-home services for an individual or a family member it's relatively straightforward, but they do have to be hired by one of the care agencies.
One of the other issues we haven't touched on, and maybe what spawned this whole discussion about how to get in-home services, is the subject of COVID. And I'm kind of curious what everybody's experience is right now, because we are changing protocols. Sometimes it feels like from day to day. So, Elliott, I'll start with you, I guess, or Jess, maybe you have some familiarity with this. What are the protocols in place for the people who are providing services inside of a house situation to any one of these people that are in our hypothetical? Do they have to be tested? Do they have to be vaccinated? What
The
gives?
question of having to be vaccinated, right? That's a bit of a hot button right now with those mandates kind of coming down. But we have certain guidelines for any of our home care providers. If you're talking about the agencies that serve folks we serve directly through the county, and they're required to don PPE and all of those protective measures we've all grown so accustomed to over these past many months. But we certainly are still very cautious about how we are interacting face-to-face with consumers as well. And while we are doing those activities, despite anyone's vaccination status, we assume that COVID is present and act accordingly. And I think that most agencies who are interacting directly with older adults in the community now are kind of taking that same stance.
Is there a vaccine mandate that will be in effect for any county provided services?
Not that's on my radar at this point. I can tell you that I know of one of our contracted providers who has done that. They put a mandate in place for their staff, put a date on it, and said, you need to provide proof of vaccination or you will, be unemployed as of this date. And they did lose quite a portion of their staff from doing that. So it is something that was going to potentially impact, the workforce even more if those things do come down the pipipeline.
For mobile
Jessica,
crisis, yep,
yeah.
We're fully responding in the community and have been through the pandemic, but we're pretty rigid about our staff and their use of PPE and maintaining physical distance and doing all we can to keep both our staff and the people we're serving safe. We know so often these services are critical, and it's important that we maintain presence in the community. We're seeing more risk in the community than we've seen probably ever before. So critically important that we have that presence and that we're committed to caring for our staff in order to maintain it. The issue of vaccination is a tough one. I can tell you the majority of our teams are vaccinated, and we want to continue to value choice as much as we can for as long as we can.
We have two questions, one in the chat. Does Mobile Crisis ever refer families directly to the Office of Senior Services to determine eligibility for services if there's a senior in the household? That was one question. Jessica, if you can
Sure.
talk about those.
I'll tell you, I'm pretty confident that Elliott probably wishes he could block me from his email. I know exactly how to get at him, and we those calls are on speed dial coming out of Mobile Crisis. So I can't say enough about how helpful he and his office have been.
And does
Well,
that go both ways, Elliott?
Yes, absolutely. Yes. No, we appreciate appreciate's maybe a stretch, right? But we like the referrals that we get from Jess, and we know that we can often, provide additional support that's outside of, her role on the Mobile Crisis team. So yes, I do agree that she does contact me with regularity.
And one other question that was posted in the Q&A, I'll just read, summarize it, but it's a middle-aged single parent with a child with intellectual disability, assume an adult child from this scenario, when that finds that when the child reaches the age of majority, some healthcare providers will not treat the adult child without either a power of attorney, written power of attorney, which the adult child is not competent to sign in this case, or a court-ordered guardianship. even when the child clearly indicates that they want the parent to make decisions for them. Short of finding a new healthcare provider, or before, instead of getting guardianship, are there any other suggestions? And I would say yes. Pennsylvania in 2006, shocking to me that the healthcare providers are not up to date on this, in 2006 adopted legislation that authorizes parents of someone without the capacity to make their own healthcare decisions to make healthcare decisions. That's even for an adult. This really does apply to adults. So healthcare decision makers, healthcare representatives under Pennsylvania law, and there's actually a list of priorities. So if the person is married, a spouse is the decision maker. If they're married and not estranged or in divorce proceedings, the spouse is the primary decision maker under the law. Otherwise, parents of an adult child, adult children of an older adult, and siblings. And if none of those people are available, if there is a close personal friend with understanding and familiarity with the person's values and wishes, and the person is incapacitated to make medical decisions, that friend can also be recognized as a healthcare representative to make healthcare decisions. Sarah knows, and the hospitals are very familiar with this, and the hospitals are very familiar with how this operates at end of life or in other crises when people may even be temporarily incapacitated, in a coma or otherwise unable to communicate for whatever medical reasons are going on. So the hospitals are very familiar. A lot of individual healthcare providers are not familiar, and we do need to do some education with our healthcare community. And one option that we have been utilizing in Montgomery County Court of Common Pleas in the Orphans Court Division in the last 2 years is an alternative to guardianship, where Judge Weilheimer and I will, in appropriate cases where there's a capable adult family member who wishes to make decisions, who would qualify as a healthcare representative. You don't need a court order to allow you to act as a healthcare representative, but if you come to us, we will give you a court order that says this person is incapacitated to make their own decisions, but their parent or their child, it has the capacity to make their decisions and qualifies as a healthcare representative and ought to be recognized as a healthcare representative, and we'll cite the statute so that you can walk into that healthcare provider's office and educate your own healthcare provider about your circumstances and what the law provides. We've found that together with being a Social Security rep payee, if the person's only income is Social Security, is usually all that you need. And you may not need either a guardianship of the estate or a guardianship of the person. Although I will say the court's always open to guardianship if it's needed. There are circumstances where to deal with an insurer, to deal with a residence, to deal with a credit card company, to deal with financial institutions, you may need a guardianship. So I'm not saying we wouldn't consider a guardianship where it's appropriate and necessary. But I am saying that we are trying to look and help families look for alternatives that are less intrusive than guardianship.
I want to really thank Judge. I know Judge Murphy has done such amazing work in this area. Some of my colleagues have been working sort of with the Elder Justice Roundtable for years. We see this constantly, that as children age out of the juvenile system for healthcare, for other services, that individual medical providers do push guardianship, and we often have empower families to describe how the healthcare representative law does apply, because guardianship is a really extreme measure. I'm not to say it's not appropriate in situations, but it is very extreme. It does strip you of almost all decision-making rights, and so it is not one to be taken lightly. So I encourage everyone to sort of explore these other options and less restrictive alternatives.
And I'm pleased to inform you, Judge Murphy, that your approach is now being tried in 2 other counties. There are pending cases in both adjoining counties, I might add, and I will be updating you on the success of those processes shortly, I hope.
I want to thank our panelists for a really robust and thoughtful and sensitive and imaginative discussion about challenging issues of providing in-home services to families who need them. There still are challenges and gaps, I think, in the way services are provided. There's certainly with income limitations and with the expense. If you don't qualify for the supported services, the expense can be very onerous to families, and we understand that. I can't say that the panelists have solved everyone's problems, but I do think that discussion has really highlighted what the issues are, how to approach the issues, how to approach them with imagination and care and in a person-centered way. So I'm really grateful for the wisdom of this group of people. I actually want to just, before we lose our audience, just re-acknowledge and introduce, for anyone who joined late, our panelists. Elliott Smith is the Deputy Director of the Direct Care Services in the Montgomery County Office of Senior Services. Thank you, Elliott. Sarah Moss is the manager of the Muller Institute for Senior Health at Abington Hospital. Thank you, Sarah, for all of your service and for joining us today. Kate Vengraitis is a staff attorney at the Community Legal Services of Pennsylvania, specializing in the SSI and Health and Independence units. Anthony Marone is a partner at the law firm Harvey, Ballard, and Bornstein, and has extensive experience representing elderly and disabled individuals in matters involving medical assistance, wills and trusts, and special needs trusts in both Pennsylvania and New Jersey. And previously, Anthony was an assistant counsel in the Office of General Counsel in what used to be called the Department of Public Welfare, is now called the Department of Human Services. And Jessica Fenchel is the Vice President of Adult Behavioral Health at Access Services, and was a key person in the development and startup of innovative programs in Montgomery County, including mobile crisis, justice-related services, case management, and homeless street outreach. So thanks to all of you for giving of your time to our community to help educate people about the kind of planning we need to do and the way we need to access a variety of services to make sure that a family gets the help and support that it needs. Anybody who wants to have a last word is welcome to interject now. Everybody's so quiet.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you.
Thanks
Thank
to
you.
all of you so much. And I hope that people got a lot out of the program.
Thank you.
Thank you at all.
Bye.
All right, bye now.